Yeah, so I'm Chloe. I work at Pfizer in the mRNA vaccines pipeline, so not COVID. Um, and just to kick it off, I have to give my disclaimer that any opinions expressed here are my own in case I say anything truly controversial, which is obviously not the plan. It feels like kind of presumptuous to assume that you know who Pfizer is, but I assume post-COVID most people are aware of the company. But what you probably aren't aware of, unless you're more in the nitty-gritty, is sort of the breakdown of how things are within the company. And in terms of career pathways, I think that's important because within these sort of 6 disciplines, it's very rare for any individual to work across disciplines. So most people who work in oncology, if you're doing real world evidence in the oncology team, you're in oncology, and it's highly unlikely that you would be working for the vaccines team. So obviously I'm in the vaccines team, and then there's rare disease, internal medicine, anti-infectives, inflammation, and immunology. And these streams would have sort of parallel teams in each stream. So like the vaccines team that I work on, we have a real world evidence team, we have a health economics and outcome research team, and everything's sort of in-house for that team. I joined Pfizer less than a year ago, so I've gone through kind of like the job search sort of stuff recently, and I'm happy to talk about that if that's at all helpful. My background is I have a PhD from the University of Toronto in infectious disease, and I did a postdoc in Boston in statistics after that. So I have like this much mathematical background, but I have to say like it's been enormously helpful having any statistical background getting into industry for sure. I worked as a research scientist for a long time, but I think getting into industry, that background in statistics was enormously valuable when I was looking for a job. So I'm happy to share any kind of like experience with the job hunt if that's helpful. But for now, I'll sort of walk you through Pfizer, through what my role is, and through available roles that we have at Pfizer right now that includes a fellowship program that's quite, I would say, like well developed. And for a lot of those people, the fellowship program is like a good stepping stone into industry if it's something you're interested in, or out of industry if you want to kind of like try it for a while, see what it's like and step into something else. They're pretty rigorous fellowship programs, so I think they're quite well respected in the space. So HR sent me this. All companies have this kind of stuff. It's kind of like cringe, but I think what they're trying to say, well, it is. I mean, like define like courage. It's sort of like whatever. But I think what they're trying to say is like, it's a nice place to work. And I have to say, like, Pfizer is a nice place to work. It's probably by a landslide the most professional environment I've ever worked in. It's a very rigorous environment. The colleagues that I work with, when I was interviewing, a lot of the people that were on the panel when I was interviewing have been at Pfizer for like decades. And I think that's a really good sign when you're interviewing that there's inevitably going to be turnover in any company. I think you can't avoid it. But I thought, and I think it is a good sign, that a lot of people have been there for a long time. And so there's just this enormous expertise in the company now. Like there's people who know the vaccine environment in Canada just inside and out, and they're this wealth of knowledge and expertise. And it's exciting to join a company that's been able to recruit and retain at that level because you're working with some really brilliant people, which is exciting. So all this to say, like I think it is a nice place to work. I work in medical affairs, and I know you had a talk from Moderna. So did they go over sort of what medical affairs is? So a lot of the companies now, they sort of divide commercial and medical. So the commercial side can do like sales and marketing and that kind of stuff, and the medical side can't engage in that at all. You're entirely data-driven really in your job. So your job, or my job as the medical affairs scientist for the vaccine pipeline, is I'm sort of in charge of the data science and the medical science for that product. So right now we're in a phase 3 trial for our first vaccine post-COVID, which is mRNA-based, which will be for influenza. And my role is that when that phase 3 trial result comes out, I'm responsible for how that data is disseminated in the Canadian environment. So as the product monograph comes together, I review the product monograph and make sure that the data from the phase 3 clinical trial is accurately and unbiased communication into the product monograph. Because obviously, like Health Canada is not remotely interested in our interpretation of how great we think this vaccine is. All they want is the data. So we have to be completely unbiased and totally data-driven, especially for a product monograph. Like you can't have branding or anything around that. It's just the science of what came out of your phase 3 trial. So the role really appeals to me because it's really like a management of, like, you're sort of like the boss of that data science that comes out of the trial in the Canadian context. And for vaccines, that's also interesting because, well, for any product, I suppose, but the vaccine efficacy that comes out of the phase 3 trial needs to be really rapidly translated into real world evidence and vaccine effectiveness in the Canadian context. So we're also in charge of organizing how that real world evidence will be collected. So we often work with external partners, like obviously universities or different healthcare professionals around that sort of thing, but collaborating on trial design and data collection and data analysis, and sort of developing the plan for how we're going to pursue localized data. Because for a lot of organizations like Health Canada, they'll accept international data for a phase 3 trial if it comes out if you don't have any local data. Because for us, the phase 3 trial was done entirely in the US. But what they want to see pretty rapidly after that, especially if you have a product in the market, is that you're collecting information on how the product looks at the Canadian market. And so that real world evidence piece for us is huge. So as we move through this sort of initial, like, product launch, once we get the phase 3 trial results, assuming that they look favorable, just to give you guys a sense, because I think most of you are probably fairly data-driven people, there's huge ways in which my team internally and externally has data needs and ways that we collaborate. We work with a lot of consulting firms that do a lot of more complex, like the economic modeling. So we have to give now to NACI, which is the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, and Health Canada, economic modeling to suggest that our vaccine is economically favorable. The government will develop their own models. They would never rely solely on an industry model, but they're open to sort of seeing what our model is and reviewing it on their own. And so we work with an agency, an external consultancy agency that does the economic modeling, because that's not something that we do in-house. So I would say our data needs are, like, assessment of data availability is a big thing, because we often say, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could look at this? And there's a lot of people working in this space who will say, like, yeah, that would be great, but like, you'll never be able to pull that data, because in Canada we have this very unique situation, in Ontario especially, of having like everything that's billed for OHIP, that data is available and accessible. But for a lot of people with the influenza vaccine, a huge amount of people aren't getting the vaccine, especially like the age range of 18 to 64. So, you know, there's data gaps in what you can and cannot assess, and it's really helpful to talk to people about that. Market analysis is another big thing. A lot of what we do is health outcomes impacted, but I would say the market analysis team, and I have an open position that I'll show you for the market analytics team, is probably less health outcomes focused than a lot of the other roles at Pfizer. Because what they're interested in is who the market is. So in vaccines, this has been really interesting lately, because in the past, like pre-COVID, you used to usually get vaccines at like your primary healthcare practitioner's office. And a lot of that has shifted recently to pharmacies. So that's a huge shift in sort of what the market is and how people are accessing vaccines, and the data that you're collecting around who's getting vaccinated when, how the pharmacy is collecting that data. Does it look the same as it did when we used to collect it from the primary healthcare physician? We also compile data into these portfolios for government and regulatory bodies, and we submit to Health Canada. There's a lot of work that goes into epidemiology and burden of disease, as well as impact modeling. So for the mRNA vaccine and influenza, what the hope is that without getting too much into like the nitty-gritty about influenza, often the reason why the vaccine is not effective is because we choose the strain really far out from when we're giving the vaccine. So the hope is that an mRNA-based technology is going to shorten that window down, so that you're, instead of choosing 6 months ahead, you could choose 3 months ahead what your strains are, and that closer time to strain selection will translate into better vaccine effectiveness. That remains completely to be seen. Like, our phase 3 clinical trials can't work within that paradigm, right? Because what we're working with is what the WHO currently recommends, and that's that 6-month window. So we're in this situation now where can we start to look into modeling a situation where WHO reduces that window, and what does that look like for a modeled out vaccine efficacy or vaccine effectiveness, or even healthcare resource utilization. And I think those are quite complex questions to ask because ultimately you have to come down to the local level if you want to look at like health resource utilization or vaccine effectiveness. But we're working at a sort of a regulatory model that's obviously on a global level. And for this vaccine in particular, it's kind of an interesting situation to be in where you're trying to communicate value of the potential for the vaccine, and you don't have any way of proving that until the vaccine is A, on the market, and B, the WHO decides that they're going to change how we do strain selection. So that could be sort of years down the road. So something that we're sort of looking into now is how do you start to evaluate the potential benefit there? Because the truth is we don't know. It's very possible that the strain drift that happens in that 3-month period isn't meaningful. Maybe it's not actually going to change vaccine effectiveness. My hypothesis is that it will, but we don't know until we test that. So that's been a big question for us around modeling. And then again, the sort of real world evidence, there's a whole team within vaccines that does real world evidence, and that's their whole sort of raison d'etre. And we work really closely with that team because a lot of them would have a data analytics, like basic biostatistics background. And they're managing the project, sort of overseeing the trial design, overseeing the analysis and the outcomes. Even if we're working with a consultancy group, they're the ones that manage it. So it's been really important for Pfizer to have in-house expertise that can oversee that. So I'm sure other people have showed you the same thing. So we obviously have like a careers login page where you can go and you just search for whatever country you're interested in. I would say for the jobs like health, economics, and outcomes research or real world evidence, those are often global jobs. So they're on the global level. They're often remote, so you can work wherever you want. In Canada, our headquarters is in just outside of Montreal. So there's not a huge amount of jobs in the Toronto area because those jobs tend to be field-based positions, and that's more like sales or like we have medical affairs scientists in the field, but that's more sort of like talking with healthcare professionals around sharing data and stuff like that. I'm happy to talk about those roles further. I just don't know how interesting they'd be to most of the folks here. So I would say at the kind of level that you're probably most interested in, these are often like global positions where headquarters for us is in New York. So a lot of those positions are headquartered there or would be global positions where there are a lot of remote opportunities. So in Canada, we do have some currently open positions. Do we have time for this? So we have this fellowship program that I think is really great. There's a position open right now in access and government relations, which you wouldn't necessarily think is overly data-driven, but it actually requires a lot of compiling of data for different bodies like CADIT or NES or the provincial payers. And my colleague who I work with most closely on the access team is a statistician by training. He was a statistician at Pfizer for a long time before he moved to the access team. And I would have to say, like, his background is enormously valuable. I absolutely love working with him because he is just able to really quickly interpret data and take a look at raw data or analyze data and interpret the messages really easily, which is like so much of what our job is like you can take a look at the data, but when you're communicating with like government partners, they don't want to go sort of line by line through each data point. They want a Coles Notes, but that Coles Notes has to be accurate and unbiased, and it has to be communicated in a way that's really clear to them, like what is the meaning behind this data? What are you taking out of it? And I think there's like enormous value for the people that can really easily distill down the key messages that come out of this data analysis in ways that are clear and concise. This might just be like second nature to you guys now, but I think that there's really huge value in people that are really good at that, especially in companies like Pfizer. So these are sort of the qualifications for these candidates. I think most of my experience is that a lot of these people have MD or PhD. That seems to be the way to go. A lot of these like just career descriptions, they say you can have a bachelor's or a master's, but I think it's a lot more competitive if you're coming at it without a sort of advanced degree. They also say previous work in pharmaceutical industry is advantageous, but I had really not when I applied for this job at Pfizer, I only had a year of experience at my previous role in industry. And I think what they want is technical expertise. So, you know, even when you're crafting your CV or your resume, I really tried to communicate like soft skills. Like I was like, you know, I like working collaboratively and all that stuff. Like they're not interested. They'll get that from you in the interview. They really want to know your technical capacity and your technical skills. And the more you can communicate that, even at a really finite level, like you can use R, fine. Like what can you do in R? Are you working with packages? Or are you making packages? Are you like, what's like just as specific as you can be? Sorry, kind of rushing, but I'm running out of time. The other position that we currently have open is in business analytics and insights, which is a highly data-driven position. They gave this lovely sort of like snippet about what the business analytics and insights team does, but really their whole job is data science, data analytics, trying to sort of better understand what the environment looks like. So for pre-launch for a new vaccine, really exploring like who are the payers, who are the users, what is the market in Ontario or Canada, and compiling that research and really helping like everyone on the team better understand what the business environment looks like. And I put up a slide sort of with the roles and responsibilities for that. I would say too, so many of these jobs are hugely collaborative. I was really surprised when I moved into industry at how interdisciplinary really every role is. And when I was interviewing, that was like the key message that came up was like, give us examples of when you worked through, like managed a team. Give us examples of when you worked with other people and you disagreed with them. Give us examples of challenging interdynamics that were at plays on your teams. And it's because we interact with like the commercial side a lot. And the commercial side often will say like, we would like to sort of like say this on the advertising, and the medical side has to say like, no, I don't think that's, if you don't think, say like, I don't think that's accurate. I think we should change the messaging to be this, but you have to do it in a way, obviously, that's like collaborative with the people around you. So I think they really value people that enjoy working in interdisciplinary teams, enjoy working with people who don't have the same background as you at all. So things that you think were really obviously, like it might not be to them, like your ability to sort of intuit that and communicate effectively is really important. Yeah, so these are the sort of two positions that are currently open. If anyone has any more questions,